So I don't know who I offended, but after talking about imposter syndrome last month, I have personally struggled with it professionally this entire month. So guys, just please be praying for me and because your girl is really going through it. Like, I'm really trying, I'm really pushing through, but it's not easy. Like, it's a lot. So yeah. Dear woman in STEM, it's so great to have this opportunity to speak with you. My name is Lillian Judy, and I'm so happy to have you with me today. The Dear Women in STEM podcast is a diary-style podcast designed to help women in STEM navigate the field. But not only that, it's a love letter to all the women in STEM who have ever been told that they're not good enough, they don't belong, or even those who just feel like they don't fit in. With your help, I'm going to answer common questions, offer support and guidance to you, and just really have a good kiki with you all as I share transparent stories and experiences with you. So buckle up and let's begin. Sincerely, Lillian Judy. Happy International Podcast Day. If you're listening to this episode on September 30th, 2023, then it's International Podcast Day, and I'm dedicating this episode to you, my wonderful listeners. Dear Women in STEM, thank you so much for all the support for my podcast. Like, the Dear Women in STEM podcast has just been such a dream come true. I started this podcast not knowing where it would go. I just wanted to start because I had a dream, I had a vision, I have where I want to see this go, but I didn't know what it would do, right? I always envisioned it to be something bigger than just a podcast. And, I just started a couple of months ago and I didn't envision it to be what it is now, right? And I think sometimes, like, when you set out to do something, right, God always breathes on it, right? And I think that's the validation that I needed, and the support that has come from across the world, honestly. Like, it's just been amazing. Like, when I check my stats and I see the UK, I see Ghana, I see India, I see America, I see like all over the world, Canada, I'm just like, wow, that's just really amazing. And you guys are really, really supporting me genuinely. And it means a lot to me. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I just want to say a huge thank you for taking the time out to celebrate my podcast, for taking the time out to listen to my podcast, to listen to my stories, to listen to the advice, to listen to, my experiences as a woman in STEM, as a Black woman in STEM. I really hope that every episode you walk away with some nuggets, you're able to learn a thing or two from my personal life experiences, Next season is going to be a bit different, so just be on the lookout. And also, I just want to tease this a bit. The final episode for this season is going to air on November 23rd, 2023, 11/23/23, and that's a very special date to me. It's actually my mom's birthday, but it's also a very special date. So just note that down. And yeah, that episode is going to be a very, 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 very special episode. So definitely be on the lookout for that final episode. Let me just say it's going to be a very transparent episode, and I think it's overdue. So I'm really ready to, bring you guys in a little. Anyways, on to this. So it's International Podcast Day. And one thing I want you all to do to help me celebrate this day is, if you listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, please, please, please leave me a comment, rate the podcast, review the podcast. That's how the podcast grows. That's how the podcast, reaches the right people. So that's how you can support the podcast. And also, if you listen to the podcast on Spotify, don't forget to also rate and review and also respond to some of the questions or the prompts that I put up there. But honestly, the best way to support the podcast is just really share it with someone, post it on social media, and yeah, just keep pushing it, It's going to do what it needs to do. And yeah. Anyway, so today I want to touch a bit on something that has kind of changed in my life recently. And so I think for the longest time, I have been opposed to change. I'm not someone that really likes change, honestly. I remember when I went through my, situation in Florida, and I had to relocate to Massachusetts, right? I had made friends in Florida, and I had to kind of leave my friends in Florida and start all over again in Massachusetts. And I really struggled with that because that was going to be like a huge change in my life. Like, I was not okay with it, and I really I actually tried to fight it. I tried to give my mom reasons why, I didn't need to leave. I tried to find alternatives, I just didn't understand why I had to leave, like physically leave a place that had actually become my home, right? I didn't like that change. I was heavily opposed to change. But looking back now, it's almost 10 years, and I realized that if I had not moved, you guys wouldn't have this podcast. You guys wouldn't have this Lillian, and I think for so long I've looked at change in such a negative light. Like, I've always looked at change as something negative and not something positive, right? And so recently I realized that change doesn't always need to be negative. Change doesn't always need to be a negative experience. Change can be good. Change is good, right? I would rather you change than you remaining the same person. I pray that every human being changes and evolves every single time, right? And in using the word evolve, I recently went for the Woman Evolve 2023 conference. And listen, that was such a life-changing experience for me. And the episode is going in a totally different direction, but I'm just going to let it do what it needs to do. I started listening to Pastor Sarah Jakes Roberts. She wasn't even Sarah Jakes Roberts at that point. She was just Sarah Jakes. And for those who don't know, she's the daughter of T.D. Jakes, world-renowned pastor, bishop, has a mega church in Dallas, Texas. And I've been following her ministry for over 10 years now. And I found her at a point in my life where I was down and I felt like a failure, and I just didn't understand why I just had to be the person in my family that just disgraced my family, or I just had to be the person in my family that had to experience such failure. I just couldn't get it right, And I stumbled on one of her videos, and I heard this girl talking, and I just realized that like she was me and I was her. She was the me of her family, right? At that point in time, she was telling the story of how she got pregnant at 13, and this is someone who is the daughter of a mega pastor. It's like a taboo for you to be pregnant, and all these things. And I just immediately connected with her ministry. So from then on, as I followed her ministry, she kind of helped pull. I feel like God used her to pull me out of the shame that I was starting to settle in, or the shame that I was starting to accept in that point in my life, right? And so going for Woman Evolve 2023 this year, and seeing her on the stage, and seeing the fact that this woman was able to gather 40,000 people in a stadium because of a ministry that she didn't even know she had, right? Somebody who once felt like her life would amount to nothing. Somebody who once felt like she was the black sheep of her family, And so imagine her life didn't change imagine she didn't undergo that pregnancy change, right? Because it is this pregnancy, it is this change that ended up catapulting her into this ministry, right? And so when I say that change is not always negative, yes, in that moment when it happened, it looked negative, it seemed negative, it seemed like, what is actually going on? Why am I going through this? Like, why me? But I'm sure if she looks back now and she's like, wow, I'm so glad that change occurred now, because that has pushed me and birthed this ministry within me. So for me, I've come to the point where I'm realizing that I'm accepting of change now, right? Regardless of how ugly it may be, regardless of how uncomfortable it may be, regardless of how it may mask itself at that point, I'm starting to accept change, right? And it could be like even change in relationships, right? Change in friendships, change in your status, change in careers, right? It may not look like it's positive in the moment, but if you look back now, like if you look back months later, years later, you realize that change was needed, right? And it reminds me of this story that I like to share. I once had an interview. I was in a job where I was not happy and I was pushing for change. I was working, I felt like I was being underpaid. I didn't like my job title. I was doing like something that was way less than I was qualified for, basically. And so I was interviewing for jobs and I ended up with this interview. And I remember I went for the interview. I aced the interview. They were basically giving me everything I wanted. Like salary wise, it was in a good location. Like everything it just looked really good, and at that point in time, I needed the company to sponsor me as an international student. And that was something that they threw in as well. They were like, yeah, we'll go ahead and sponsor you. So it really felt too good to be true. And like, I was just like, wow, God, you are really coming through for me. Then down the line, nothing goes wrong. I don't do anything out of the ordinary. I get a phone call in the middle of, I think it was raining or something, after work one day. And then they're just like, yeah, sorry, we're taking the job back. And they give me a flimsy excuse. And I'm just like, what is actually happening? Right? That change was one that I was not ready for. That change was one that I really struggled to see to see the good in, right? And I remember I cried, I prayed, I questioned God for so many weeks and months. And then the pandemic hit. And then let me tell you that the person I was going to end up working with ended up losing their job, meaning I would have lost my job a year later. So now looking back, I'm like, wow, God, that change was meant to protect me, and so I really hope this, helps shape your mind differently, or it helps you see things differently when it comes to change. I really just wanted to come on here today to encourage you to just see change differently. I know this episode just seems a bit different from, my previous episodes where I talk or I focus more on like, STEM or women in STEM or Black women in STEM or whatever. But today I just felt really led to just share my personal experiences and some of the things that are really, some of the things that I'm really going through in my life right now. And I hope that, you can connect with this. I hope that you can relate to what I'm saying, and if you feel like you have experienced something like this before, drop a comment and let me know. I'd love to feel like it's not just me. But yeah, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. And I will see you all next month. Happy International Podcast Day. Sincerely, Lillian Judy.